2, Priority Action Plan number 2. It is not a change in the slide. Could you please check the slides? Next slide, please. Yes, this is the content of my presentation, introduction, overview of VDABAP 2 project, categorization by region, by sector, cost estimates, financing options, and conclusion. This is the given introduction. VIDA is a blueprint for infrastructure development in Africa. VIDA was first adopted by EU Head of State and the government in January 2012, and spearheaded by leading Pan-African institution mandated by the African Union member state, AUC, AUDA, African Development Bank, and UNECA. 4 sectors cover under VIDA: transport, energy, ICT, and transboundary water. VIDA PAP 1 covered the period from 2012 until 2022. The VIDA PAP 2 covered the period from 2021 up to 2030. There is something that, yeah, please. Yeah. I'll change it from here?
Yes.
Okay. VIDA PAP 2 process, the selection criteria, there is 3 main categories. The first one regarding the selection criteria in the regional integration, and linking 2 or more member states, because this is not only for member countries to cover at least 2 countries or 3 countries. This is covered by region, have impact in 2 or more member states, inclusive sustainability, gender sensitivity, this is take 10%, rural connectivity 5%, and the climate friendliness is 10%. And the third criteria for economic and financial, integrated corridor approach is evaluated by 10%, job creation 5%, economic impact 10%, private sector attractiveness 20%, and smart innovation is 5%. 69 projects already adopted by the head of state at the last summit, and this is estimated cost is around 160 billion. And this table also, they mentioned about the project related by the region. For the northern region, 6 projects was selected with around 16.5 billion. For the eastern region, 13 projects with 37.8 billion. Western region, 11 projects with 40.5 billion US dollar, and central 11 projects, 8.7 billion US dollar, and the southern region is 10 projects with 13.8 billion, and a multi-regional 17 projects with 40.6 billion. Project per sector, as I mentioned earlier, that VIDA cover 4 sectors, transport, energy, and ICT and transboundary water, you will find 25 projects with 108.4 billion, and the energy 18 projects 38.4 billion, and ICT 11 projects 5.2 billion. Water is 15 projects with total 9 billion. And the selection through inclusive, as I mentioned, a consultative bottom-up process adopted by EU Head of State and the government in February 2021. And this is pie chart indicates that 67 of the project from the transport sector, and after that 24 percentage of the project that cover for the energy, and 60% for water, and 3% for ICT. This is the bid up to financing requirement, 16 billion a year. Project preparation, 8.1, 5 to 8% of the CAPEX, and also 161.1%. Project implementation, 19.3. This is around from 9 to 12%. And operation and maintenance is 34.5 billion. 16 billion US dollar is needed every year for implementation of the BIDA project. Implementation and partnership. This is one of the content of my presentation. 3 guiding documents have been adopted along with the 69 project implementation strategy out the NEPAD. And success will depend on ownership of the project, regional commitment, and among stakeholder implementation partner, private sector engagement, and finance. Investing in BIDA, BAB2 is the win-win for both Africa and investors. By this slide, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Atef, for that very insightful presentation. So very quickly, I would like to make welcome on stage the moderator for this plenary session, Mr. Semer Gray-Johnson, Director, TCPF, Outer NEPAD. Also, I'd like to make welcome Mr. Atef Mazouk as well for this session, and Mr. Amin Idris Adum for this session. We also have a virtual speaker joining us this morning. His name is Dr. Robert Lisenge. He's the Chief Energy Infrastructure and Services Section, UNECA. Good morning and welcome. Over to you, Mr. Semer.
Thank you very much, Program Director. And good morning, colleagues. We are very happy to be here, this being the first panel session. And I can see my brother Robert is connected. It's been a long time. Wish you were here with us. Next to me, of course, I have my brother Atef. We've worked closely over the years, and of course, Director of our Program Delivery and Coordination of AUDA NEPAD, Mr. Idris Adum, my colleague at AUDA NEPAD. My name is Semer Gray-Johnson. I'm the Director of Technical Cooperation Program Funding at African Union Development Agency, NEPAD. For this session, we will have two main speakers, pretty much Amin and then Robert. But just to recap what the session's about, it's really to discuss the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, PIDA-PAP2, as Dr. Mayaki mentioned, and also His Excellency Raila Odinga, Right Honorable Raila Odinga mentioned about PIDA and the work that we've done over the years in infrastructure and the speech that Atif gave on behalf of the Commissioner. It's quite important for us to reflect deeply on where we're coming from PIDA PAP 1, which is the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, Priority Action Plan 1, and moving into Priority Action Plan 2. So for this session, we'll briefly present the PIDA PAP 2, of which Atif already did. And just to indicate that there was a huge decision taken in February at the AU summit by the heads of state, and also budget has been allocated for the implementation of PIDA PAP 2, but the entire implementation of itself requires about $160 billion US, and I think that's a quantum amount of funding that will be required. Of course, private sector has to be part of it, multilateral development banks, regional banks. So this session is quite important, and the implementation itself will run from 2021 to 2030. So PIDA PAP 2, I think, as mentioned before, should be that silver bullet that should transform this continent, the African continent. So without wasting any further time, I'll just want to hand over to Amin to tell us about where we're coming from and how do you see the implementation of PIDA PAP 2, and thereafter Robert can come in. Amin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Simer. In fact, if you look at PIDA PAP 2, which comes after the PIDA PAP 1, we completely rethought the PIDA infrastructure implementation. We have defined what we have called the integrated corridor approach. The regional integration, actually, index report have shown that the level of integration of the continent is quite low, with an average of 0.3, illustrating that Africa is poorly integrated on the productive and infrastructural dimension. Taking in view that the objective of regional integration is to ease the movement of people, movement of goods, but also services and capital within a region, it becomes clear for us as an institution that sustainable, high-quality infrastructure is a must, definitely. But because of this very low regional integration, which is a significant bottleneck in the realization of the Agenda 2063, we thought that it's important to redefine the PIDA as part of a corridor development approach. Thus, last year, actually this year, in February 2021, head of states and government have approved our approach. Yeah. This approach of corridor development is an integral part, actually, of really accelerating the intra-African trade, which is really essential to the integration of the continent. So we have defined the PIDA PAP 2, which is a multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional, and corridor approach, corridor-based approach projects in energy, transport, ICT, but also water. And the total value of those projects are around $160 billion, out of which $8 billion would be required for the project preparation. So through the corridor development, provisioning infrastructure into rural Africa opens up market and enhance actually agricultural value chains, which is key factors of inclusive transformation for African economics. So energy corridors in Africa as well are key to harnessing the continent's energy resources. So we at ODA-NEPAD, currently we are working as well with the regional economic communities, but also the power pools, partners, to develop as part of our integrated approach and as part of the PIDA PAP 2, we are working to develop a continental transmission master plan. Such master plan will lead to the creation of a potential electricity spot market as well, which will enable member states to gain access to more affordable and reliable source of electricity. And actually, this is very important. So this is where we are and where we are coming from when it comes to the preparation and to the new generation of PIDA. I will talk later about the tools and the instruments that we have developed to push through the implementation of the PIDA and to accelerate actually the realization of our vision, which is to the vision of the Africa's Agenda 2063 as developed by the African Union. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, thank you for telling us and sharing where we're coming from, where we want to be, and what has changed, and what we should be expecting in terms of PIDA PAP 2. I think at this point I'll invite Dr. Robert Lisinge, a good brother, who is the head of infrastructure and energy at the UNECA. Robert, we're happy that you're on this panel, and we're looking forward to hearing from your perspectives of PIDA PAP 2, because I know you've been part of that journey for many, many years. You've seen PIDA PAP 1, and we'll really want to know from your thinking, from the UNECA, what will be different this time, and how quickly will we be able to implement by 2030. So Robert, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I would have loved to be with you in Dubai this morning. Unfortunately, that is not possible, but I'm still very pleased to be part of this panel. I think I would want to focus my intervention on how do we bring on board new potential partners to support the implementation of PIDA. I think the question really is, who are new potential partners for PIDA? This, I believe, would be partners who invest in infrastructure development, but have not so far been involved in the implementation of PIDA. A good place to start in that regard would be green funds. This is particularly relevant as this conference coincides with COP26, the conference on climate change that is taking place in Glasgow, Scotland, UK, starting today as well. I think green funds are meant to support projects that are designed to limit greenhouse gas emissions. This would include projects that member states have included in their nationally determined contribution. Nationally determined contribution, as you know, are projects that member states themselves have said they are going to implement to try to curb the emission of CO2. PIDA projects are eligible for funding through green funds. This is because climate friendliness, as you know, was explicitly one of the criteria for selecting PIDA projects. The PIDA financing strategy that was prepared by the African Development Bank, of course, in collaboration with the African Union Commission, does a great job in matching the 69 priority projects of PIDA with different financing options. In this regard, a number of projects have been identified as having a high likelihood of attracting green finance. These include rail projects and inland water projects that are known to be environmentally very friendly indeed. I think road transport projects that also build climate resilience, as well as clean energy projects, all fall in this category of projects in PIDA that could be financed through green funds. I would also like to say that the BRICS Bank or the New Development Bank and other banks like DBSA, Development Bank of Southern Africa, that have special windows for green projects, it's about time that we also harness them for PIDA. I think the second group of investors I would like to talk about is impact investors. These are investors who look beyond financial returns to social and environmental considerations in their investment decisions. I think that PIDA is also meant for this group of investors, as inclusiveness was an important dimension in the selection criteria for PIDA projects. Hence, things like gender mainstreaming, job creation that Dr. Mayaki mentioned, and rural connectivities were all among the criteria for selecting a PIDA PAP 2 project. So improving the infrastructure development index was also one of the project selection criteria. So in essence, projects that close the infrastructure deficit of countries and regions, while at the same time improve the well-being and livelihoods of Africa, are those that have been selected for PIDA PAP 2. Finally, I would like to talk about the opportunities that PIDA offers for public-private partnerships. In this regard, financial viability, as we all know, was taken into consideration in the selection of PIDA PAP2 project. Moreover, projects in sectors that have proven to be attractive to the private sector were prioritized. And I'm thinking here of energy and ICT project. In essence, PIDA PAP2 has room for all categories of investors, including green funds, impact investors, and those who would want to share their risk with governments through public-private partnership. And finally, I would end by encouraging Africa's strategic partners, such as the European Union, China, in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative, to use PIDA as a building block for this partnership in the spirit of win-win collaboration. Let me end there for now, and back to you, my friend, moderator, Sime.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert. I think you put it best, that this time around, the 4 different partners that will be coming on board, we certainly didn't have 2 of the 4. I mean, the green financing wasn't part of PIDA PAP1. Impact investors is new as a new partner to PIDA PAP2. And there was a bit of PPPs, and of course you've mentioned looking at Africa's strategic partners, FOCAC, TCAD process, and all of that. So I think, look, just listening to what Amin has told us, what has changed, and also what you have said, Robert, in terms of the new potential partners into PIDA PAP2, I think this is the right time for us to take some questions, comments. I know, Amin, you want to talk more about some of the instruments that yourself and your team and also the partners have, strategic partners have worked on, the instruments in terms of project preparation and other instruments that you want to talk about. Should we open the floor now and get some questions, or, you want to touch a little bit about the instruments so that...
Maybe give me 2 minutes to talk quickly about
please go ahead.
The instruments. In fact, when we have completed while we were implementing PIDA PAP1, and we learned actually some very important lesson. We really needed to have private sector as part of the journey. This is extremely important. But we had as well significant challenges when it comes to the quality of the implementation. Thus, we devised a series of instruments to help us to overcome those challenges. Number one, we have created 3 tools: the service delivery mechanism, project preparation, from pre-preparation, pre-feasibility to feasibility. This is extremely important, and ODANEPAD is the one undertaking that with the support of our partners, obviously the African Development Bank, but also bilateral and multilateral cooperation. This is extremely important. But then once we have completed that, we also need to attract the private sector. And to attract the private sector, we have created what we call the Continental Business Network, which is extremely important. It has been validated by the African Union. So far, it's the only African sector business network which is actually officially mandated to talk and engage with partners and on behalf of the African Union, by the way. It's working very well. So we need actually to address as well issues pertaining to overpricing investment. And this is actually extremely important when it comes to infrastructure. And to do that, we need really to handle all the issues of risk management. That's one of the reasons why the CBN, the Continental Business Network, have published as well, is publishing another report about de-risking infrastructure and PIDA projects in Africa, which shows that actually when it comes to risk, Africa's projects were much less risky than similar projects in other parts of the world. And this is actually a very important message to share and to show to the world, because every time when we talk about Africa, people are bringing this issue of risk, but this is not actually close to the reality. The reality actually is the opposite. So with the CBN, we had as well we have been actually working on the issues of trade inequity and subjecting Africa to merely being a supplier of raw material for the global economy and value chain. This is all very important. We have been working on that because it has a huge impact on environment, social, and governance of the continent, which can actually impact the quality of the implementation of the project. So there are some issues. I spoke quickly about the SDM. I will come to that later on when there will be some questions. I would like Simer quickly to discuss as well about the 5% agenda and the Africa Infrastructure Guarantee Mechanism. As you know, we have noted that out of the almost $2 trillion assets managed by African pension funds, most of them are only 1.5% actually is being invested in Africa, and we have created this mechanism to encourage them to invest up to 5% of those assets into Africa infrastructure projects. And so far, I think we are really moving toward the right direction. I will pause here, and then I will come back later when there will be some questions to clarify all those issues. Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Amin. I think just before we start the questions and comments, I'll just like to summarize so that we all appreciate PIDAPAP 2. We've heard from Amin the instruments. He talked about the service delivery mechanism, the CBN, the de-risking using the Africa Infrastructure Guarantee Mechanism, and the 5% agenda. So there are 4 major areas that will fast-track or accelerate PIDAPAP 2. We also heard from ATEF the presentation that he gave on the selection process of these projects. And then, of course, our brother Robert talks to us about 4 new potential partners, 2 of which were never part of PIDAPAP 2, green financing, and also bringing in impact investors, but also doubling up on public-private partnerships, and finally using these strategic partners, these platforms, FOCAC, TICAT, and so forth. So I think with these new information that's coming on board and also allowing us to understand what has changed and how quickly we can move with these projects, I think this is the right time where we will now take in the questions or comments, and it can be directed at Robert, it can be directed at Amin, it can be directed at ATEF. So the floor is open. There will be questions coming in online, I understand, and the program director will let us know those questions when they come in. But we can start from the floor. So I assume we do have mics around, and if anyone has a comment or wants to make a suggestion or has a question, please put up your hand. Okay, we have a hand there, and we also have another hand there. Oh, yeah, so this is happening. It's lively, it's good. Can we have the mic, the roving mic? I would assume there's a mic somewhere. Yeah, it's right there. Please go ahead. Just say your name and direct and say the question and tell us who you're directing the question to. Thank you. I think we need some help with the mic. It's yes, I think it's working now.
Your Excellencies, it was a wonderful presentation on PIDA 2. My name is Dr. Mustafa. We are based in Dubai since 1958 into trading manufacturing services. We have big business interest in Africa. And the impact investment, what you mentioned, Mr. Robert, about the green economy and also the environmental. My one humble suggestion, what my research in my PhD in leadership, which I have done, that in PPP should incorporate one element which is called PPCP, Public, Private and Community Partnership. The community partnership will enhance a lot of development in the country, in the locally. It will increase in the capacity building, knowledge transfer, skill development. It will create leadership, and also it will create a lot of ancillaries of the PPP, the industry which works on. So this is a model which I have created, and it can definitely work very well in Africa with this community involvement in this impact investment. This is my humble suggestion to you, the esteemed panelist.
Thank you. I think that question will be for Robert. PPC, public-private community, something different, something new. So just flag that. We'll come back to you on that. Can we take a second question or comment? Yes, madam, you have the floor. There's a mic right behind you.
Do you hear? I can't hear.
You can't hear? Okay, we'll ask them to speak a bit louder.
So, first of all, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dubai All African and Union African today is making the impact. My name is Leila. I have a platform called IamAfrica.net because Africa is the future. Africa have a lot of mining sources, a lot of mindset capacity and great leader. Just this movement of challenge, what we see today, and especially in Expo, a lot of African countries are here to contribute and to bridge together one hand for the economy and culture. Today, the big challenge is in the future leader, in the youth, in the SMEs and micro SMEs. When you did talk about number, statistic, I see that you did not mention anything about the SMEs and small investments. So how we can involve those small investments, and in Africa there is a lot of handcraft, tourism, programming and all, and even though they are educating the small entrepreneur. So when we talk about big investments, there is a lot of orientation to Africa from globally, and especially from UAE, which they are investing huge amount on many infrastructures. And I know the leaders of Africa are working hard to change the system of investments and protections of investors, but still until today, for a health issue, education, and SMEs and micro SMEs and women empowerment, that goals of sustainable development still not reach the target. How we can be useful and helpful for that area, and we need to collaborate with you, and hallelujah, it's time for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam, you will later find out that Amin here, his second name is SMEs. So he is the expert when it comes to what we are doing on SMEs and MSMEs. So I think, Amin, it will be interesting for you to also talk a little bit about the work that you are doing with your team on that. We'll take another question or comment before we now hand over to Robert and Amin to come in. Yes, sir, you have the floor. Just say your name and direct the question.
Thank you so much. My name is Humphrey Nwugo. I work for African Export-Import Bank. I manage the bank's regional office for Southern Africa. The first intervention will be more or less a question. Okay. And then the second one will be a comment on the new partnership. So on the question part, and of course this is not a criticism, this is just effectively to highlight certain elements that would have given further impetus to the overall infrastructure development agenda of African Union going to the other NEPAD. I think what I've heard today, absolutely very interesting, and thank you so much for driving that. Now, it would have been good to have seen a review of PIDA 1 and what was achieved and what lessons were learned and how they have been taken care of in the 2. All right? So perhaps we have that internally, but it wasn't highlighted. It would have been good to show that. And as I say, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. Now, in PIDA 2, what are the milestone measurements that you have? Also, I believe you have it. Perhaps you didn't highlight. It would be good to let us know. Because these are very, very, very critical elements. I think His Excellency highlighted the infrastructure gap, which we have also identified ourselves as African Export and Import Bank. They are very huge. Without that, we are going nowhere. So we need to measure ourselves. If we are on one transaction or on one project for 10 years, we are not getting it right. Now, we should say every quarter, every year, half yearly, whatever it is, that these are what we've achieved, or these are what we've set out to achieve. Do you have that internally? If you do not, is there a way you can incorporate that into your overall structure to make sure that you continue to assess your achievement and your measurement. That's the first. Now, the second is on the new partnership. I must say that I was a bit surprised that in the whole conversation we did not mention the African Export-Import Bank. I mean African and Export-Import, Afrexim Bank. Ultimately, the beneficiary of this whole infrastructure conversation is intra-African trade. And I heard that from His Excellency, I heard that from ATEF as well, that is the whole idea, to engender trade amongst African countries. We know that intra-African share of total African trade today is just about 16, 17%, meaning Africa continues to trade with the rest of the world for up to 85%. All these things that I'm talking about are supposed to encourage trade amongst African countries. Now, that is where Afrexim Bank and AFCFTA are squarely situated, because that is really their mandate, as it were. You may have primary partners and then secondary partners, meaning people like Afrexim Bank and AFCFTA are ultimate beneficiaries of this whole arrangement. Do they have a role to play in crafting the overall agenda? And we finance infrastructure as well, as a matter of fact, Afrexim Bank. And we finance trade-enabling infrastructure. So we should be working with the African Development Bank, working with other NEPAD, on that 160 billion project that you've identified, to see those that are trade-enabling, that we can lead or we can champion. We have a project preparatory facility, which also can be brought into the whole equation. The fact is, different regional and multilateral institutions have different products that are sitting within their own pockets. So there needs to be a mechanism in which you harness the internal structures that you find within each institution to see how that can be used to facilitate the development and financing of infrastructure. So I just thought I should bring in that. I'm not sure who I achieved. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we'll walk backwards. On the second point, maybe, I believe maybe, Robert, you'll have to take that on how we bring in Afri-Exim with the multilaterals and the regional banks and so forth. You may also want to touch a little bit, because I know you've done some work, some research on the benchmarks and the implementation of PIDA. But I think Amin and Atef, maybe you might want to share some information as to PIDA PAP 1, how effective was it? What was the percentage of implementation? And is there any baseline for PIDA PAP 2? So I think we can take one more question, and then we allow the panelists to make provide their answers or give us an intervention on the topics that were raised. Yes, sir. Mr. Ini, you have the floor, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Okay. My name is Ini Ura. I am from the Africa Finance Corporation. And previously I was with the African Development Bank and was the anchor for the development of NEPAD infrastructure, which has metamorphosized into the PIDA initiatives. Also was the anchor for the NEPAD IPPF, the Infrastructure Preparation Fund, which is assisting you going forward. But my intervention is to bring to your attention the impact that Africa Finance Corporation is creating in infrastructure development on the continent. We started operations in 2008, and we are focused only on infrastructure. And we have done tremendous transformational infrastructure in energy, in transport, in telecommunications, in ICT, industries. And what I'm trying to bring to you is that AFC has a lot of good experience that I think can be used by AU NEPAD to develop regional infrastructure. We are open, we are available, and we are Afrocentric. For us, it is how can we crowd in financing for infrastructure on the continent? And we work with the likes of UNECA, we work with the African Development Bank, we work with Afrexim Bank. I think collectively, you have a pool of resources, you have a pool of experience, and you have a pool of skills that can be deployed to fast track and deliver on regional infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ini. Of course, for the colleagues that know Ini, he was one of the architects of the short-term action plan all the way to the medium to long-term action plan, and of course, PIDA, a true doyen of infrastructure on the continent. I think his comments and questions, Robert, you'll have to take them on. We also expand the partnerships, bringing AFC together with Afrexim, and how do we plan to do that? And of course, I mean, you can also talk on that too. So at this point, if there are no other, maybe we'll just take one more because we're running out of time. Very quickly, sir, you can introduce yourself and.
Hi, thank you very much, esteemed panelists and moderator. My name is Draghi Saro, first of all.
Can you speak a bit louder, please?
Let me just do this. Yes. My name is Draghi Saro. My question is in relation to one. Yes. My name is Draghi Saro. My question is in relation to one. Yes. My name is Draghi Saro. My question is in relation to the idea around ensuring that they are kind of in the forefront of the implementation for the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. So in PIDA 2 and in the current status, what is the current position for women and girls, and how are they playing a role towards the implementation for PIDA 2? And is there a possibility for both these two groups to have positions of not power, but positions of political kind of will to be able to kind of actually play a role within the actual agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think, we'll direct that to you and Atef, the political will in these two groups, as the gentleman said. I'm sure you can talk about the PC also. I get at this point, we will now hand over to our panelists. Atef, you can make an intervention if you wish to, and then we'll go to Robert, and then wrap up with Amin.
Thank you, Samsung, moderator of this session. I don't have too much to add for this point, but I would like also to give attention that we had a lot of challenges during the implementation of BID above 1, especially regarding some strategies especially for resource mobilization and partnership. It is not ready in order to start the implementation, because only adopted the strategy as PIDA and the implementation phase, it is moved to Audanibad as the implementation agency, and the challenges, as I mentioned, is a lot. But for the phase 2 or PIDA above 2, all the institutions is ready to start the implement, and for this reason we have a lot of projects. The first one, we have 10 projects only. Now we have 69 projects, and we have estimated cost 160 billion, and we have resource mobilization. We have a strategy how to implement and something like that. And also I would like to give the floor to Director Amin. He has a lot of information about this area. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Atif. I think, Robert, will hand over to you. The question on PPC, PPPs, PPC, and of course, expanding the partnership to include AFC, AfriExim, and other major players on the African continent. You have the floor, Robert.
Thank you so much, Sime. On the issue of PPC partnerships, public-private community partnership, I can't agree more. I think the UN in general is promoting the concept of people-first PPP. So PPPs should not only be about financial return, but also the social benefits of project. And I think this speaks actually to the whole concept of impact investment, which is not just making money. Okay, it's important for businessmen, but how do these projects result in improved livelihoods of the community, creation of jobs, improve incomes? So I think that the concept of public-private community partnership is embedded in this notion of impact impact investment. And so the whole idea is that investors who want to see social benefit have a place in a project, because inclusiveness, as we mentioned before, was part and parcel of the selection criteria of PIDA. Now, the Africa is the future. The big challenge is the youth and SMEs. I think that question also, again, how do we bring in SMEs in PIDA project? I think this again speaks directly to the notion of impact investment. I feel we indicated that bringing this topic of impact investment was justified, given these two questions. And I think this is linked to the last question of how does PIDA PAP 2 take women on board? I have to say that from the beginning, women were involved in the design of PIDA PAP 2. In fact, the whole network of women in infrastructure development has been created by the African Union Commission for the very first time. And this network was part and parcel, even in designing criteria that one could use to select projects from a gender mainstreaming perspective. And just to highlight that one of these is the extent to which procurement of those who are delivering construction services, or even consultancy, to what extent provide incentives for companies that are led by women. So I have to say that gender and youth were implicitly part and parcel of the process of developing PIDA PAP 2. And this leads me to the question and comment from the colleague from AfriExim Bank. Was there a review of PIDA PAP 1? Absolutely. I think the starting point in PIDA PAP 2 was a comprehensive review of what transpired during PIDA PAP 1. We do know the percentage of projects of PIDA PAP 1 that were implemented. I don't have it off-head, but it was something more than 40% of PIDA PAP 1 projects that were implemented. Not good enough. We can do certainly better. Were lessons learned? Yes. One of the lessons that was learned was that the countries who ultimately implement projects were not involved to the extent that one would have loved to see in PIDA PAP 1 development. So there was an issue of ownership. And this was addressed by the African Union Commission by a series of national dialogues on PIDA, which fed into the PIDA PAP 2 process. Also, as Dr. Mayaki, I think, mentioned in the morning, we had over 400 projects in PIDA PAP 1, which was a huge number of projects even to track. And so this time we decided we would limit the number of projects. That's why you have 69 projects now, which is significantly lower than the number of projects that we had in PIDA PAP 1. Now, What about the involvement of Afrexim Bank, African Finance Corporation? I think my intervention was actually not meant to be exhaustive in terms of which partners have been in the past supporting the PIDA project. I was forward-looking about new partners which we could bring on board to support those that are already there. I would have to say that the African Development Bank, which represented the development finance institution. Of course, the African Development Bank cannot replace African Bank or African Finance Corporation, but it was African Development Bank that played a critical role in developing a financing strategy for PIDA-PAP2. So we have that document that identified all possible options for financing PIDA-PAP2 projects. So I will encourage my colleagues in the Development Finance Institution to look at those options that have been discussed in detail and see where they probably definitely would fit. I also agree with Afrexim Bank, the important role of infrastructure for trade. ECA has just done research to look at the implications of the continental free trade area for infrastructure development. So we basically know which PIDA projects would support the continental free trade area the most. And this is a discussion that we are willing to have with the Afrexim Bank and AFC. I have to say that we're already working very closely with Dr. Eni of the African Finance Corporation, and we very much look forward to touch, please. You can remind me.
No, thank you. I think you were very exhaustive. Amin, we'll hand over to you. We know that MSMEs and SMMEs are very close to your heart. I know that you've also worked on the job creation toolkit, youth involvement in PIDA and gender, as Robert said. Perhaps you can share with the audience and those that are also connected virtually what you foresee in MSMEs and SMEs participating in PIDA-PAP2 as the comments that were raised by our distinguished participant, the lady.
Thank you, Simer. Before to go to the MSMEs, I would like just to bring a quick response on the question about the baseline or the achievement of PIDA-PAP1. I think this is important. PIDA-PAP1 was 409 projects. That was huge, actually, over a period of 10 years. And most of those projects are long-term projects. That means they still actually continue for implementation. We have a dashboard where actually you can get update on a monthly basis about what's going on PIDA-PAP1. Out of those projects, 54 actually are energy projects. 114 were ICT project, and then you have 232 that are actually transport projects. And so far, we know exactly where we are for each of those projects in terms of implementation. Many of them have been already fully implemented, especially the transport and the road and railway as well projects, but still we have a lot that are going at the level of project structuring or tendering or even constructions. In fact, there are many who are at the level of construction. 78 exactly right now, and 76 are already operational. So we have baseline, and we know actually where we are coming from with a lot of precision, I would say. And that's what helped us to define precisely exactly how the PIDA-PAP2 should look like and how we should actually continue to drive the infrastructure development in Africa. Now, going to the MSMEs, you know, Simer, MSMEs in Africa, I think, we come to the conclusion that the baseline is actually around 100 million micro small and medium enterprises in Africa. And those MSMEs are extremely critical to our economies. In some countries, they represent up to 80% of the GDP in some countries. And when it comes to job creation, MSMEs are number one in Africa. And to give you some stats, MSMEs in 2020 accounted for 360 million jobs in the continent. Whereas all governments reunited, you put all the public services jobs in the continent together, they accounted for 60 million jobs. And big corporations, multinationals, big companies accounted for 66 million jobs. So that means that when it comes to job creation and improvement of livelihood of Africans, MSMEs are the ones actually, they are doing 3 times more than normal or structured private sector and governments reunited. Now, MSMEs in Africa as well face a lot of challenges. And the first challenge they face actually is the one of structure and organizational model. As you know, 92% of them, 92% out of the 100 millions, are working in what we call the informal sector. They pay taxes, but they are not organized. And because they are not organized, they don't have basic accounting, basic finance, basic organizational model. They appear like being quite risky for traditional financial sector. Therefore, they don't necessarily get actually loan and I would say financial services from the bank, but they all have a bank account. You know, this is quite curious actually. They pay taxes, they have a bank account, but they are not getting services from government and they are not getting services as well from the financial sector. Those are 92 million actually in the continent. So we have developed a program to address this very, I would say, it's an annoying actually issue, to tell you the truth, because people actually are paying taxes and they are not getting service. They have a bank account and they pay bank, but they are not getting back the service they should expect from them. So we are addressing this issue by we have actually developed a solution. We are providing to the MSMEs service to help them to organize themselves, to get more competences, more skills for basic financing, basic marketing, basic sales, basic distribution skills, and we are doing it with the private sector. Basically, we have engaged banks because we believe that banks must be the one actually helping MSMEs to structure themselves. So we have one of the Pan-African Bank, EcoBank, working with us on that one. We have as well started a conversation actually with Africa Bank. We are trying to bring them on board. We have as well Badia, the bank, Arab for Africa Development, and we are working toward bringing as well World Bank, but mostly private sector bank to help us actually to tackle this first challenge. Number two, MSMEs has as well issues related to access to financing. And for them to access to financing, our solution is not about giving them money. It's about connecting them to the normal financial sector. And for that, we need to de-risk them. So by helping them to organize themselves, we are helping them to de-risk. And when the level of risk or the appearance of risk actually is well managed, they will become more bankable for the traditional banking sector. So we are creating bridges between MSMEs and banks. And to that effect, we have developed actually a platform with the support of Microsoft. We are working on that one to create this bridge. And we have already piloted this solution with EcoBank in 8 countries. In fact, last year and this year, our program have reached out to 3.4 million MSMEs, and we have started, this is in terms of building capacity, and we have started already the financing, the financing solutions with EcoBank in 8 countries, actually, namely Nigeria, Rwanda, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Chad, Ghana, I think Niger, and Togo. This is where actually we are doing. And the third solution is facilitate access of MSMEs to market, but especially public procurement. And this is extremely important because in most of the African countries, public procurement is one of the biggest drivers of the economy. But yet MSMEs have not necessarily access to public procurement. Why? Because regulations are quite difficult for them to understand. So we are trying to ease their understanding in terms of those regulations And we are working as well with some governments to develop a very easy way for MSMEs to access to public procurement, and at the same time working with banks to allow them to finance actually their access to those public procurement. So this is ongoing. And the last solution, solution number 4, is social protection. It's extremely important, this one, because we have, throughout our studies, we have realized that 80% of MSMEs in Africa that are failing, it's because of the lack of social protection. There is no social security, 80% of MSMEs in Africa that are failing, it's because of the lack of social protection. There is no social security,
Madam, we a bit pressed for time, unless you want to quickly make a quick comment before we wrap up.
The mic?
Maybe you speak on the mic because we have people connected online.
I'm sorry, just quick remark.
Yeah, sure.
It's fantastic what you present for the SMEs, and that's what we are doing here as incubator. Thank you for the 5, 6 solution you say. So I'm coming back to DIPA 2 and DIPA 1 as the Africa we want, and Union African and investments and entrepreneur. Today, I'm sorry, I'm disappointed. Where is the women entrepreneur when you are talking about equality, gender equality, sustainable development? I don't see any women here, not any entrepreneur, not any investors. Arabs, we giving a platform to all the women to be here. And today here, there is no women to speak, no women to present the right of women. I'm sorry, I apologize, but just small remark. We need to see more women African here with us in Expo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure that will be taken on board. I know the commissioner has tried
to get talk about
women involved in infrastructure. I'm not sure whether, you want to say something quick before we wrap up?
Actually, it's a very valid comment, and organizers will take it actually for next sessions. But I would like to provide maybe 2, 3 information about the work we are doing on MSMEs with women. Out of the 100 million MSMEs we have accounted actually for the continent in 2020, the biggest numbers, 60% of those MSMEs are women and youth driven. And out of the 3.7 million MSMEs that we reached out last year and this year, 42% actually are women-led MSMEs in the continent. Now, when you look at actually the statistics, and something which is interesting, most of the African MSMEs are working on trade and general trade distributions, and then food sector as well. All those MSMEs are driven by women generally. So we are doing a lot of work in this area. We don't necessarily have the time actually to talk about that, and that's not really the subject. But I would like to reassure you that as part of our program in African Union Development Agency, we are doing very well in this area, and we believe that since most of our MSMEs are driven and led by women, we have to make sure that we allow them to grow and to prosper like any other entrepreneur in the continent. Thank you, Simer.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Amin. I think Atef, you want to say something quick?
Yes, I just would like to highlight regarding the gender equality. The high-level management at the African Union Commission, we have 8 chairperson, deputy chairperson, and 6 commissioners. You will find it is 4-4. This is the gender equality, and the top management of the infrastructure and the energy at the African Union, Her Excellency Dr. Amana Bouzid. Also, yeah, this is we have, and the beauty chairperson of the commission. Yeah.
No, that's good. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that information through. I think, colleagues, we will now, wrap up the session. I can comfortably say that this session was a session about 4s. We had, Amin talked about the 4 instruments that he and his team and the wider colleagues that are working on in terms of advancing PIDA-PAP 2. He talked about the SDM, the CBN, the Africa Infrastructure Guarantee Mechanism, the 5% agenda. We had Robert talked about the 4 new partners that have changed or that are going to accelerate PIDA-PAP 2. Robert talked about green financing. That's 1. 2, he talked about public-private partnerships, impact investors, and fourthly, to bring in new partners using these global platforms that Africa uses as its strategic partnerships. And of course, Amin mentioned to us what he's doing, him and his team, in terms of structuring the SMMEs, in terms of allowing them to understand better procurement, and also making sure that they have access to finance, and also ensuring that in terms of the banking sector, they will be able to participate even more in PIDA-PAP 2. So I think with those new information that has come to light, we should be very comfortable and confident that PIDA-PAP 2, in terms of implementation, will be very different from PIDA-PAP 1. So I just want all of us to give our panelists a round of applause. Again, Mr. Amin Idris is the Director of Program Coordination and Development and Delivery at African Union Development Agency, NEPAD. Mr. Atef here is the Acting Director at AUC in terms for the Department of Infrastructure and Energy. And Dr. Robert Lisinga, our good brother at UNECA, has worked with us for many years. He's the Head of Infrastructure and Energy at UNECA. So just join me in giving them a huge round of applause, and thank you very, very much. And we are on time. We actually 1 minute and 30 seconds ahead of time. So I'm very hopeful that PIDA-PAP 2 will be ahead of time too. Thank you. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simer, the moderator for this session. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists also for this insightful discussion this morning on mobilizing investment for infrastructure. Thank you very much also to those who asked questions from the floor. Thank you particularly for the question on gender equality. And this is something we take very seriously at the African Union. Thank you very much. Now we would proceed on a quick health break for 10 minutes. It's 11:27 now, so we'll be expecting you back in the room in the next 10 minutes. Thank you very much, and see you soon for the next plenary session.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will begin in 1 minute.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the session. I hope you enjoyed your tea break. Now we'll be moving on very quickly to plenary session 2 on promotion of investment in infrastructure in Africa for PIDA priority projects. And to moderate this session, we have Dr. Towela Inyurenda Jerry. She's the head Economic Integration Division, AUDA NEPAD. Please sit to my near left over here. And also with her on the panel, we have Mr. Vido Kismaton. He's the co-founder and CEO of Continest. Welcome. Please sit over here. And next we have Dr. Ini Urua, who is the Deputy Director and Head of Country Relations, Africa Finance Corporation. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And joining us once again virtually, we have Dr. Robert Lisinge. He's the Chief Energy, Infrastructure and Services Section, UNECA. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Towela.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. So this is the session on promotion of investment in infrastructure in Africa for PIDA priority projects. And our take-off point is the previous session, the high-level panel, where the question of the PIDA PAP2, the actual investments required, were discussed and presented. I think just to start maybe in terms of some of the key takeaways from that panel, which will inform our discussions today. Number one, I think we got a very clear articulation of what the funding needs were and what the financing gaps were. And I think very important what the High Rep, Right Honorable Raila Odinga spoke about in terms of making sure that we were being very efficient in terms of our usage of the resources. The issues around the new partnerships and really bringing in issues of green financing as well as impact investing, I think very important. We recognize, of course, that there is a broad array of institutions and partners that are willing and able to support PIDA implementation, including Afreximbank, AFC, AFDB, and various other partners and institutions across the continent. Issues around the inclusivity, which defined the designing of PIDA-PAP2, I think that also was very important and very significant. We heard, I think, very passionate calls for the participation of women and also the inclusion of youth and MSMEs in PIDA implementation. I think just to mention that from the perspective of AUD and NEPAD, similar to the idea of PPCP, which is looking at community partnerships, we are looking at the 4P approach, which is public, private, and people partnerships, to make sure that we do take into account the issues of inclusivity. I think also important to mention that at the level of the African Union, as far as infrastructure is concerned, we have the African Network for Women in Infrastructure, which is also meant to be that platform that allows for better engagement of women in the infrastructure projects across the continent. And last but not least, I think the need to underscore the AFCFTA and how PIDA-PAP2 implementation must have a direct correlation and AUD and NEPAD, and he is the Chief for Energy, Infrastructure and Services at UNECA. We also have Mr. Vido Krishmarchan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Continest, a provider of foldable container solutions based in Hungary. And then lastly, we have Dr. Ini Urua, who I think we all heard was one of the architects of PIDA, and he is now currently the Deputy Director and Head of Country Relations at AFC. So welcome to my panelists. So with that, we're just going to get very quickly into it. I think the previous panel was very good at telling us the what and the why, and we want to delve a little bit now into the how. You know, how are we going to mobilize these partnerships? How are we going to mobilize these investments that are so needed for PIDA-PAP2 implementation? So I'd like to start maybe just by asking a very general question to the panelists. And I'll really start with you, Dr. Ini, in terms of just providing a bit of context for us and just really talking to really what is the one way in which Africa can position itself in terms of getting this financing for infrastructure. You know, what is it that we can learn in terms of where we've been, and how do we position ourselves in terms of attracting these investments that are so needed for Africa's infrastructure?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tawela. I think it is very, very important when we're talking about attracting financing or investments into the infrastructure domain to ensure that we have very, very concrete projects. And what do I mean by that? The projects have been well prepared, both in terms of the technical and financial requirements, but also on the institutional framework that surrounds that. And we know very well, when you're talking of an and I'll give you a typical example. You know, I was part of the team that developed the East African submarine cable. And it took us such a long time because we had to actually move from one country to the other and see how we harmonize the policies to enhance, allow the projects to go. But if I superimpose that on the project that we did, the AFC Champion, Africa Finance Corporation, that was one of its first projects when it came into being, the Men1 cable. Men1 cable runs from Portugal all around West Africa and into Cameroon. And it was easier to actually manage those interfaces. And getting those institutional framework underlined allows you to put in what I might call it an investment framework that is understandable, that people can recognize, that people can see the flows, and investments will come. But if you don't do that, then everybody thinks, oh, I'm going to just, my money is going to be stuck somewhere, or nothing is going to happen. And that is a key thing. And I believe that AU NEPAD should actually spend more time on those institutional issues. The rest, AFC, African Development Bank, AFREXIM, we can come in to develop those projects and package them technically and financially. And then not only that, assist you in syndication or bringing in other financiers to make sure that we deliver and deliver on the projects. So I think I'll probably leave that as an opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robert, same question to you. Where do you see the opportunities, and how can Africa position itself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Toela. How can Africa position itself? I see three things. One, we are prepared. I think it took more than 2 years to develop the PIDA PAP2 project. Extensive consultation, including the member states, including regional economic communities, development finance institution, AUC, ECA. I think the methodology was rigorous, and as a result, we now have 69 projects that have been endorsed by African member states. And so we know our priority. So Africa is open for business, for partners who want to invest in these projects. That is one, we are prepared. Number two, I think the African continental free trade area provides a huge opportunity for investment in infrastructure. This year we just completed a study on the implications of the free trade area for the demand of transport infrastructure and services on the continent. We have identified those links that would need improvement to be able to accommodate the kind of traffic of good that we are envisaging as a result of the continental free trade area. So the potential for investment in infrastructure is so huge. I think we have estimated, for instance, that Africa will need more than 2 million more trucks on its roads as a result of the continental free trade area. This would definitely require improvement in infrastructure. Take railway, for instance. We've estimated that a huge amount of wagons would be needed to transport the additional goods as a result of the continental free trade area. So again, investment in railways is clearly there. We've identified the number of aircraft that we would need additionally as a result of the continental free trade area. Investments in airports and ports and so on. So I think the opportunities that the continental free trade area provides is just limitless. And then the third and the last point I would want to raise in terms of the opportunity is COVID-19. COVID-19 was a huge challenge, of course, for Africa, but it also provides opportunities to build back or build forward better. I think it showed us the vulnerability African countries are in as a result of deficits in infrastructure. Take the health sector. We do understand that less than 30% of African healthcare centers actually have access to electricity. I think what COVID-19 has showed us is that we need to invest in infrastructure to better cope with these kinds of health, economic, and environmental shocks going forward. I think for that reason, I think Africa should be attractive for those who want to invest in infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Vito, if I can turn to you. So as a company based in Hungary, you have an infrastructure solution that you're developing. I'm curious to know from you, what lessons do you see for Africa in terms of our infrastructure development and what we can learn from your experiences?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I really appreciate the opportunity of being here because we are a non-African SME, so we're filling the gap of having small and medium-sized companies. We're not filling the gap of having of representing the women business area right now, but hopefully that will change as well in the near future. So, to your question, basically, I think what is a best practice in our case back in Hungary, in Europe, is the fact that also due to our agility and to the innovative technology that we have, we managed to develop partnerships with government agencies that basically facilitated us in developing new skills, new products, and new markets. I can give you 2 examples on this. I will start with the non-African one, which is basically a contract, an R&D contract between us as an SME, which was, let's say, 12 months ago, considered a startup. So we as a new SME got awarded an R&D contract by Hungarian Defense Forces to develop a technology, a training technology. And by doing this, basically the government financed the R&D project, and we made a huge leap in the way that what sort of engineering and knowledge platform do we have inside the company. So basically they just took us to another level of where we are from technological development point of view. When it comes to the African relevance is the project that we had in Uganda that was handed over to WHO last week, where our partner was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary. And basically the government fulfilled one of its commitments on the 2021 commitments to United Nations, and they assigned us to deliver this project. And basically this project was a small medical facility in northeast Uganda, and with doing this, choosing an SME to deliver this project, basically they facilitated our entry in the African market. And after we delivered this project successfully to the end user, we already had discussions with WHO and the Ministry of Health of Uganda, and then some other counterparts in Tanzania, about how can we bring other projects which are not government funded anymore, but they are working, they are sustained by the market and the demand and offerings that we as a technological supplier can bring. So I think this is what Hungary, with us in cooperation, Hungarian government did in a good way, that opened technological growth and market growth opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much. So far I think we've heard about the importance of having the right institutional frameworks, leveraging the various different partnerships that exist, and especially with our DFIs and financing institutions, issues around preparedness and leveraging the opportunities of the CFTA and COVID-19. And lastly, I think the message about government partnering with small SMEs to help them and support them to bring products to market. So moving on, Robert, I think we're well aware of the role that UNECA played in terms of the PIDA partnership strategy, and I think you've alluded to the issues around the kinds of partnerships and new partnerships that we need to leverage. And what I wanted maybe just to sort of get a bit more practical is to talk about the private sector. And really to ask you then, in terms of the partnership strategy and in terms of these new partnerships that we've alluded to, how do we get private sector more engaged? And how do we get them more engaged with that long-term view of Africa's development trajectory, especially in the context of projects such as PIDA PAP2?
Thank you so much. I think 2 things in getting the private sector more engaged. First of all, they need to know the projects that we have. And I think that basically, if you move from the national to the regional or the continental level, it's an issue of openness and transparency. Do we have infrastructure development program that are guiding us ahead? I think today most African countries do have an infrastructure development program at the national level. The regional economic communities as well, they do have their infrastructure development master plans and so on. But most importantly, at the continental level, we have the PIDA priority action plan. So the private sector should know that there's a pipeline of projects in the form of PIDA project. That is number one. I think number two is the environment for engagement of the private sector in this project. And there are a number of things in that regard. How attractive is private sector investment in infrastructure projects on the continent? I think if you want to invest in energy, for instance, the private sector is interested in seeing the kinds of tariffs, what incentive do they have to bring in maybe equipment that could be used for green project. Staying with energy, if someone is going to maybe invest as an independent developer of energy, how ready is that country or region to take on board the energy that is generated? So I'm talking here about the infrastructure to transmit and distribute. So basically, you need to have a pipeline of projects, which we do. You need to be open in the sense that you have a program which shows your commitment, which we do as well in Africa, because PIDA is there. We have a priority project. We now need to have the enabling environment for private sector investment. And so, do we have the incentives for private sector to come in? How easy it is to do business in your country? In the case of energy, how ready are you to absorb the energy that will be generated to distribute it in the country? So I think those are some of the things that we would have to do to attract private sector on the continent. And I think that for the first two, the having a program, we are really there. ACS now working. We've done a study in more than 16 countries to review the regulatory environment of these countries, and we are hoping that with the findings, we could encourage these countries to implement some of the reforms that will attract the private sector. So maybe I leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Robert. So I want to turn to you, Dr. Ini. I think you eloquently gave us the example in terms of the challenges of doing cross-border projects, and you talked about the East African cable, which I assume might be easy, but maybe not, and also the main one cable and how those projects were different and the different challenges encountered. Maybe just to get from you now, in terms of how we can actually accelerate the implementation of these projects, number one, but also, more importantly, I think looking at it from the point of view of financing. So what do you foresee in terms of the financing of these projects, but also the kinds of maybe innovations and innovative thinking that we need to have as we are approaching this target of financing the 69 PIDA projects with a price tag of about $160 billion?
Yeah, thank you, Tawela. I think, I think very simply, it is doable. And I think Robert talked about making sure that we can actually engage the private sector. And there are a few cardinal principles when you want to engage the private sector. Typical private sector will ask, if I put my money in there, can I get it back? So you tick. When can I get it back? We have an idea, tick. And then later we'll ask, will I be able to make something out of it? And as such, most of the projects have to be structured in such a way that you can sell it, not just to the DF. Because wherever they see opportunities where they can engage and where they won't lose money, then they will engage. We have done, AFC has actually brought in a lot of private sector into infrastructure projects on the continent, unprecedented. If you take, for example, in Gabon, with the Gabon Special Economic Zone, we brought in, I think, Olam, and that project now is actually has delivered so much value to Gabon. It's the second highest employer of labor in Gabon. It has added a lot of quality economic activities to the country. And now, They are producing a lot more when they were exporting raw materials. We are now exporting that framework to Togo, to Cote d'Ivoire, and so on and so forth. So the key thing is that, look, let's take those projects, any of them. Let's structure them very well. And then we can sell it. And then you get people to finance, and then you move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. And within a short time, don't think about the billions. Think about the projects and how you structure around them. When it's good, it's effective. And then you will actually see, I call it transformational development on regional infrastructure, power, roads, et cetera, et cetera. And suddenly, the economic trade or trade within countries across the continent will increase. And that's what we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we need to eat that elephant one piece at a time.
Yes.
Okay. Vida, just turning to you now, and you talked about your projects. I think the two projects you've mentioned, specifically the one in Uganda, where you've been working on a health solution. And Robert mentioned the fact that COVID-19 was an opportunity in terms of really thinking through some of the challenges that exist on the continent and leveraging those challenges in terms of the build-out of infrastructure and services. Just curious to know from you now, as an MSME, we're well aware that COVID-19 has resulted in quite a number of supply chain disruptions across the world. I think we're seeing the impacts of those right now. And just to understand from you, as an MSME, how have you navigated those kinds of disruptions, and what is the takeaway from that?
Thank you. So, when COVID started, end of 2019, early 2020, we were having huge pipeline of projects, mainly non-medical, like all kind of events and all like global events and the continental events, and lots of R&D. And what happened is that everything stopped. Everything got canceled from one day to the other. So we ended up with having zero income, like literally zero income in the first 5 months of 2020, which basically we had like a zero income forecast for the whole year. But what happened is that together with our partner from the UK, we managed to reorganize and rethink our way of operation. And then instead of delivering temporary infrastructure solutions to large sport events or entertainment events, we started to deliver temporary infrastructure solutions to COVID impacted areas. And for example, infrastructure transport was one of these. So we have today 11 airports in the UK where we have some sort of activity related to COVID response, like testing or lab facilities. So this was the first. And what we learned since COVID started is that we had to, as you said it, we had to reorganize our supply chain. We had to become much more integrated. So we used to rely on subcontractors a lot, and these days we're kind of becoming a vertically integrated organization, meaning that we still have to procure the raw material, obviously, from the manufacturers, but the manufacturing process is almost 100% integrated vertically in our organization, so we're not depending on subcontractors. And now we reached 2 weeks ago, actually, the point where the microchip issue impacted us as well, because we had 3 large, completely new machines delivered to us. The first one was delivered on time, and then the second and the third, we got the red flag that the supplier cannot deal with it. Lucky for us, these are COVID-related projects, and therefore they're ranked on the top of each procurement list. So we got voids on different supply issues, but what we actually learned is this: we have to be flexible, we have to be very proactive, we cannot just wait for... There's a lot of government support in Europe, there still is. You can hear about the big bailout programs, but instead of that, actually we haven't really benefited from any bailout program except this machinery procurement, which enhanced our efficiency. But it was basically flexibility that managed us through this COVID issue.
Okay, so a lot of pivoting and a lot of flexibility in terms of adjusting to the disruptions. And I think you found a new niche, I think, because of COVID-19. Maybe just to now turn to see if there's any comments, inputs, contributions from the floor as well as from the online participants. So if there's anybody who would like to ask a question, make a comment, make an intervention. I see the lady in front here. Please to take the floor. And I see you, sir, as well. So we'll start with the lady and then we'll come to you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Olunwati Duati, and I'm Director for Export Development at Afro-Exim Bank. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. I just want to speak to a point that was raised by Dr. Eni on the fact that, DFIs have a role to play in supporting the implementation of most of these projects across the continent and in attracting private sector stakeholders to play in, more in this role. I wanted to add a bit to it, that as DFIs, we've gone a step further, even beyond just assisting in ensuring that these projects are well structured to be able to attract private sector players. But we can also assist in de-risking these investments that private sector stakeholders will be making in this project. And we've been able to do this by developing various credit enhancement instruments, like guarantees, that we put on offer. For example, my institution, African Export-Import Bank, we have the Afro-Exim Bank Guarantees Program that we place at disposal of private sector investors to sort of de-risk their investments in countries. One of the questions Dr. Eni mentioned was, how do I get my money back? Expropriation risk, country risk, investment risk. So we are willing to put these programs at the disposal of the projects that we are trying to conceive to be able to attract private sector players to come in. Because if we are going to realize this 160 billion investments for PIDA 2, we need private sector to play a bigger role, and we need to make it easier for them to come on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir, you have the floor.
Very good afternoon. Dr. Chandresh Agrawal from Emirates, which is a French multinational and world leader.
So could you just maybe speak closer to the mic?
Okay, sorry. Dr. Chandresh Agrawal from Emirates, which is a world leader in mineral solutions. First of all, congratulations for the African Union. There's a lot of progress in terms of infrastructure. But still, I feel that in case of mineral, because that is one of the best mineral resource in the world, and we are ready to invest. But unfortunate part is we always struggle to get a proper infrastructure in terms of availability of the resources specifically. So as mineral is one of the big contributor for any country growth. So any specific plan for other than the infrastructure to make it possible for the investor?
Thank you very much. So your question is very specific to the mineral sector, if I understand correctly.
Very correct.
Okay. Any other questions or inputs or contributions from the floor? Do we have anybody online? Okay. Answer the question about the mineral sector and maybe the specific issues around infrastructure as it relates to the mineral sector. And then I could ask Dr. Eni maybe just to comment on this issue of the various products out there. I think what's important maybe is to sort of figure out how do we bring all these things together, and how do we leverage all the collective instruments and energy and support that's available to make sure that we're able to actually implement PIDA. So maybe Robert, over to you on the mineral resources sector.
Right. I think obviously you need a lot of energy to be able to explore mineral resources. And I think the concept of joint development comes into the picture. I think it's the Chinese that have really tried to develop this concept of joint development of minerals and energy, and so they are trying to promote the idea of having transmission lines from where you have energy resources like hydro to areas where you have mineral resources. So you are jointly developing this together. But I think the key here is to ensure that the local community is beneficiated as well. Of course. For instance, you don't want to generate electricity in point A and with the sole purpose of transmitting it to point B, where you're going to explore natural resources and then passing all the people in between. So I think there's a lot of scope in some countries as well. You do find development of railway lines, for instance, that are going specifically to areas where you have natural resources. And I think that the investors in these natural resources, in some cases, have been able to invest as well in this railway line. So I do believe it's an issue of modeling. How do you model investment in mineral resources that at the same time take into consideration the infrastructure requirements? So we need to come up with innovative financing mechanisms. We do also know about resource for infrastructure deals that exist in many African countries, DRC, Angola, and so on and so forth, where African countries have used their natural resources endowment to fund their infrastructure. So I see a lot of possibilities in this area. It's actually happening. I guess what is required is for potential investors to sit down with the countries that do have these resources to iron out deals that will not only, on the one hand, having these resources being explored, but that are also linked to the development of infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. So, Dr. Ini, how do we bring all these things together?
Yeah, I think before I address the issue of bringing all the things together, let me just touch on the minerals issue. I think let me use the Africa Finance Corporation's experience. For us, we are very, very keen on saying infrastructure, wherever it is, has to be sustainable. And to be sustainable is that it has to pay for itself. But not only paying for itself, it has to be in a position to actually attract other sectors, mining, agro-processing, industrial. And so we always focus on those ecosystem investments. For example, now we are working with the Afro-Exim Bank and we're trying to get battery minerals to be developed in Congo. And that will entail, one, building the right infrastructure in terms of roads, building the right infrastructure in terms of power, and also building the right infrastructure in terms of actually making sure that the processing of those minerals are in DRC. I mean, we all know we export raw materials all the time. For example, you know, the battery minerals, Africa gets less than 4% of the value, and the rest goes. So we are very keen to ensure that that structure is there, and that entails exactly what Robert has said, whereby we actually have all those supporting infrastructure. But those infrastructure have to be sustainable. They have to pay for themselves. And that's where everything keeps working. And that comes back to the issue that I think perhaps I need to charge the countries. The countries have to actually look at projects or infrastructure projects on a holistic way. Sometimes you end up that, you know, you have disagreements between countries in terms of regulatory or legal systems. And then we are looking at multi-country projects. Those multi-country projects, either in roads, rail, power, they have to be in a situation whereby they can sustain themselves. Don't let the government manage it, because they will manage it to the ground. Let them sustain themselves. And then you can add additional infrastructure, and that sustains things together. So how do we put all this together? Is that, look, we want to bring in the private sector. These are the things that we need to do. We want to bring in investments from the DFI. These are the things that we have to do. We want to make sure that those infrastructure are sustainable. We need to make sure that it is properly managed. We have the skills. We want to make sure that we create opportunities and employment for our youths. We need to actually make sure that we can train them and engage them in those activities. And suddenly, it's not going to be magic, but surely and suddenly we'll be able to get everything together, and those things would work for themselves. But most importantly, for those major regional infrastructure, let those projects pay for themselves and be sustainable.
Thank you very much. I think I like what you're saying because, number one, I think you've alluded to the fact that we actually have all the pieces there, but we need to somehow bring them together. But I think the issue around sustainability, the issue around making sure that the infrastructure can pay for itself, I think is very key. And I think the issue also around the multi-sector approach and saying that, yes, we're building infrastructure, but that infrastructure then must link up in terms of developing local industries, in terms of creating jobs, in terms of beneficiation to the communities where that infrastructure is traversing. And I think that's the spirit behind the corridor approach. And I think it's good that you have highlighted that, but I think that there's a bit of homework to be done in terms of making sure that we're able to pull all these different pieces together. Just a quick check if there's still any requests for interventions or comments or questions from the floor. I don't see any. Are there any online questions? No questions online. So we can maybe proceed to just get some final thoughts and views, perhaps, from the different partners. So I think, Robert, maybe just to sort of maybe just as we get to the end of the session, maybe just to get your views in terms of the partnership strategy, the fact that we have a lot of different platforms, I think, that are really aimed at galvanizing and catalyzing action around infrastructure development. And perhaps the question then for us is that how do we make these events and these different platforms work better in terms of helping us to actually move concretely in terms of very deliberate action on the projects and also being very deliberate about getting the investments into these projects?
Right. I think that, first of all, the platforms like PIDA Week are great in showcasing Africa's priority projects. But I do believe that there should be veritable marketplaces where people can come, promoters of projects could showcase all those projects, 69. I don't know if we can showcase all 69 projects in one PIDA Week, but certainly the heart of a PIDA Week would be a marketplace where the promoters of PIDA projects would come and sell their projects, where the investors as well will come in to see the different projects that are available. I think that the African Development Bank has done a great job working together with AUC, but also with ECA and other NEPA to come up with the financing strategy for PIDA. I think the good thing about that financing strategy is to look at all potential options, about 8 of them, whether it's green finance, whether it's PPP, project bonds, and so on and so forth. I think that document has breaking down or has attempted to match each project with a different financing mechanism. For instance, it has identified those projects that are best for green finance, those that are best for PPP, and so on. So I think we should be going to this platform in a more targeted way. For each of our projects, we should be able to tell the investors, we've done our homework, you are an impact investor, we believe that projects A, B, C, D are for you, or you want to do PPPs, we have done our homework, please look at these projects A, B, C. I think we need to be better prepared. I think the general discussion is always fine for policy issues, but I think we spend a lot of time to identify the challenges. Now we have the projects. We should be marketing this project. I think perhaps also we can take it a little bit higher in terms of the participation from our leaders. I would like to see more heads of states, ministers in this forums. I think it shows the ownership at the highest level. I take an example of the BRR, the Belt and Road Initiative. If a Belt and Road Initiative forum is organized in Beijing, I think if you see the number of heads of states who go there, you would be amazed. The deals that are struck between China and the different countries that participate. This is a vision that I would like to see for our PIDA Week and other such platforms. It should be more pragmatic, a place where deals are struck between project owners and the potential investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Vidra, maybe just turning to you now in terms of your experience and maybe just getting a sense. I mean, there's been talk about skills development, there's been talk about job creation, there's been talk about financing, and I think you alluded a little bit in terms of the role of government and how government actually supported your company. Maybe just speak to us a little bit about the issues around the skills development and job creation, and maybe how you, from your experience and with your company, how you have seen that play out.
Thank you. So before answering the question, I was listening to the other panelists, and it came to my mind that it's important for me as a Hungarian SME representative to highlight the fact that the Hungarian Export Promotion Agency, which is an agency under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, puts a big emphasis on promoting Hungarian businesses abroad. And this means that we are not only interested as a government and as companies to come and sell products, but also bring technology, bring solutions that can be implemented on long term. And this is the case for us, for example, now with Uganda and Tanzania, where we brought a small project, we implemented it, and now we are talking about technological transfer into Africa. And I think this is something that the representatives of AFC and the African Union should benefit from, that the EU countries now have an urge to grow markets and to expand themselves, and Africa is there. And for example, the Hungarian Exim Bank, we talked about the Afro Exim Bank a lot today, but the Hungarian Exim Bank is also very active. We have business partners who have 10, 20 million euro worth project in Africa, infrastructure project, mainly in water, where we have some sideline affiliation with them as well, which are funded by the Hungarian Exim Bank, and they're being implemented here in Africa. When it comes to job creation and our presence, let's say in Europe and then other places as well, Hungary is in a good position from the point of view that there's a lot of industrialization. Automotive industry is very heavily present, and the current government puts a big emphasis on technological innovation and supports companies like ourselves in order to be able to grow locally and to then to grow internationally as well. From a qualified labor point of view, we are lucky. We are around 50 people right now on our payroll. We didn't reach this glass ceiling yet, but there are issues when you start to grow further, like hundreds or thousands of employees, and then you have to look for how else can you diversify and grow. And for example, for us going abroad, going to the Middle East, for example, I'm going to a meeting after this panel where we are prototyping our containers here in Dubai, in Jebel Ali port. Same thing is going to happen hopefully very soon in Eastern Africa. We do the same thing in Asia, so that's how we are supporting our growth both locally and internationally.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Ini, I want to end maybe with you in the time that we have left. I think that when we look at the infrastructure financing trends, we see a bit of an uptake in terms of domestic financing in certain regions and countries, but clearly we still have a bit of way to go in terms of closing the infrastructure gap. So my question to you is how do we leverage the domestic resources? How can we better make sure that we're able to leverage domestic resources resources and really direct them towards the financing of infrastructure. I know you alluded to some of the requirements and the prerequisites, but maybe give us a little bit more in terms of this issue of the domestic financing.
No, thank you again, Tawela. I think perhaps let me just say it's a secret. Africa Finance Corporation was actually sustained through domestic financing. If you recall, sometime I think 2004, 2005, when we actually challenged the heads of states in terms of, look, use your domestic resources to support infrastructure. And so that's the idea of the AFC came in. And the whole equity that set up AFC is all domestic equity. Mm-hmm. And what AFC has also been doing, based on that, is also working with some of the commercial banks and then providing them skills transfers and working alongside them. And so if at all your local financial institutions can have that capacity to look at project financing as opposed to trade financing, then you're already putting them in the loop. And they're very, very important as we go, especially when we are looking at these regional infrastructure networks that involves more than one country. You will need some of those local financial institutions to support what is going on. So, AFC by itself is a key and visible example of how domestic financing can be used to solve the challenges that Africa has in infrastructure. And I believe we will be able to do that on multilateral basis or multi-country basis, working with our other partners, African Development Bank, UNECA, AFREXIM, AU NEPAD, and so on and so forth. We are there to find solutions, to implement solutions. And we want that. We want to infect everybody to think solutions. That way we conquer the problems that Africa has on infrastructure.
Thank you, and you couldn't have said it better. So we need to think in a solution-oriented manner. So we have the pieces, we have the building blocks, but we need to start moving towards solutions. I think you'll agree with me that our panelists, I think, have been very excellent and eloquent in their interventions. So if you would just give them a round of applause, please. So I think in closing, maybe just to summarize a little bit of what has been said, I think the key takeaway is that, yes, we can do it. I think Dr. Ini has been very emphatic in terms of really urging us to really think in terms of solutions, but also to recognize the fact that we have the capacities and the capabilities in terms of being able to promote these investments and drive financing into our projects. I think very important in terms of the roles that the different institutions play at a regional and continental level, but also how we drill that down into action at the level of our member states, taking into account the fact that these projects are multi-regional, cross-border, but obviously implementation happens in countries. Issues around our institutional frameworks, around how we harness the collective energy of our various financing institutions, how we make sure that we're keeping our eye on the fact that we're building this infrastructure for our people. So we have to make sure that we are being inclusive in terms of how the infrastructure is being developed, but also in terms of the beneficiation and where that infrastructure is and what it's driving in terms of our local industries, MSMEs, the participation of women and youth, and really taking all that into account as we build out this infrastructure. So from my side, I think just to thank everybody for your participation, to thank my panelists, and really just to echo the fact that we have everything that we need in terms of being able to drive PIDA-PUB to implementation, and now we just need to get on with it. Lastly, I would like to make the offer that we are having PIDA Week in December this year in Nairobi, and we really would love to see a gathering of our various financial institutions and partners to really sit and really crack this issue of how we will implement these projects. We do intend to add this transactional dimension that has been called for in terms terms of being very deliberate and focusing on specific projects. So we would definitely welcome and invite your participation in PIDA Week this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Towela, for anchoring this session. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Irua, Mr. Vido, and of course, Dr. Robert, for joining us virtually this morning. Now we're going to go on our lunch break, which will take us up until 2 p.m., and we'll be expected to be back in the room at 2 p.m. to start the next plenary session. Thank you very much, and see you back at 2 p.m. Enjoy your lunch.